Hey everyone, James from TeaDB here, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. I am going to be drinking some ripe today out of my big blue pot, as I often do on this show. But I'm going to be bringing on a different ripe, and a ripe that really does stand out for a couple of reasons. So going to be talking a little bit about very high-end ripe. The tea I'm bringing on is the Nameless one from White2Tea. It's definitely one of the most expensive ripes that I have seen offered on the market for a while. I think a cake is $120 for just a small 200-gram cake, so that's 60 cents a gram. And so I did recently bring on a high-end Yunnan sourcing ripe that I think was $70 or $80 for a 357-gram cake. So this tea, that tea was about 20 cents a gram. This one, on the other hand, is 60 cents a gram. So this is a whole order of magnitude higher, more expensive than that tea is. So that tea, I would say, is a fairly high-end ripe, and this tea definitely escalates it even quite a bit further. And I think that also brings some interesting questions on how we think about tea and relative cost and such. The sort of like high-endness of the tea often varies sort of like what we're used to as far as a baseline for tea. If I saw something that was 60 cents a gram and it was like a Da Hong Pao or like a Shui Jin Gui, so different types of Wu Yan Cha, that would not, I would not think of that in the same way that I see like a high-end ripe that's 60 cents a gram. I'm like, whoa. So I think a lot just matters, and it's like even 60 cents a gram, we're talking about like some raw Pu'erh, it's like, oh, that's some Wistaria cake, something like that. It's like you can find even higher end raw fairly easily without trying too hard, but for ripe, this is really rare. So it's a high-end tea that is selling at kind of raw Pu'erh prices or medium to high-end raw or Pu'erh prices or Yancha prices in a category that's usually quite a bit cheaper. So that's what we're looking at. The Nameless one, I actually don't know what the name is from. I think it's probably some nerdy reference to some sort of game, I think, from my quick Google search. But White2Tea always has some interesting names and references, so one of the fun things about their brand. And one thing that was mentioned in the description is that the material here came from observing sort of that ripening process, but it's also a material that comes from, I think, high-end raw pu'erh that's used in this post-fermentation process of ripe. So I think that's interesting as well. And I think it's also a blend, which I think adds to my interest. I think especially when you get into sort of these small-scale, high-end productions, they do tend to localize into an area. So I think having a blend does create a few different areas of interest as well. And it's the rare case where this tea that I'm drinking just the normal old way I drink it, that is 60 cents a gram, is actually more expensive than my more normal daily brew. Today I'm brewing some 2005 Iwu. It's like 25 cents a gram, something like that. So this tea in the big blue pot is actually quite a bit more expensive. So anyways, I did not buy a cake of this tea. I have a sample. This is my last session of the sample. So I'm looking forward to trying what is one of the highest end ripes that I've had, certainly in terms of cost. The Nameless one, let's go. Drinking steep number 5 here that I've just made. The longevity on this tea, this is my third session, I just finished the sample of it, is really good. So I'd expect this to go quite a bit longer than I would other ripe teas. So let me do steep number 6 on camera. Going to push it a little bit longer. One thing I did observe visually about this tea is that the liqueur does brew just a little bit lighter in color than comparable ripes using the same sort of leaf to gram ratio and parameters. And that's a little bit unsurprising to me. I would expect that when you're using really high-end material like this, you don't want to overpower it with having a really heavy, strong fermentation process. So my guess, based off of this, is that probably Two Dog, the White2Tea proprietor, probably used a lighter ripening process when making this tea. So I think that's interesting, probably lends to a little bit more complexity, but kind of also an interesting pairing to think of it as something more mundane and far more available and cheap, like the V93 tool, which I have also just done an episode of. So you can see I brewed this tea with very recently boiled water for, good 30-45 seconds, and the color could definitely be darker. So interesting. Let's take a smell of this tea. I really struggle to know how to describe these ripes. This smells different than your normal ripe. I can't say that I exactly know how. I don't know. It smells more lively and a little bit less based, full toned, and that's also kind of how the tea tastes as well. But the flavor, the ripe aroma definitely smells like a ripe, but there's a lot more just richness of aroma than you would expect versus your standard Munghai ripe or even just your standard White2Tea or your non-sourcing ripe. Cheers, y'all. So, taste is really good, frankly. Vanilla, fruitiness, really complex, a lot of stuff going on. The thickness is good. The texture, I think, really, really stands out. It almost goes, one of the textures I really like in Pu'erh, or in ripe Pu'erh, is sort of when it has that really silky, velvety texture. This almost takes it to like almost another level of just sort of refinement. So really, really, really tasty in terms of that. Just a really rich brew. And one other thing I'm going to note is one of the other sort of higher end ripes that Denny and I brought onto, and actually the very last episode that we filmed, is the Yunnan sourcing Lao Man Ni ripe. And that's almost just from a different planet. It's like we think about how these teas compare versus sort of our baseline. I'd say this tea firmly is a ripe and fits into that category, whereas something like that Lao Man Ni, it's almost impossible to compare with this because it's so different from the standards of the category. So when you're drinking something like this, I feel like this is, it's like you get the ripe taste, whereas someone that likes 99% of ripes may get a very different experience from the Lao Man Ni and may not like it, or someone that is more into strength and raw Pu'erh and stuff like that might actually like the Lao Man Ni a lot more than they like your sort of average ripes. This, for me, is sort of like the ultimate refinement of the ripe experience. It's just a really, really tasty tea. So thank you to White2Tea for making it. Cheers. So this tea, a little bit stronger than the previous one, just sort of carries a little bit more of that robust body and stuff. A lot of complexity to this tea. It's not all low noted, so I think that sort of lends towards the the lower ripening process, so not a super heavy fermentation. And just a ton of complexity going, a lot of liveliness. Looking at the leaves too, there's sort of a gradation of the leaves, so that means that probably it's definitely a blend of some sort. And the leaves are also definitely not pitch black either, so I think that would also lend towards the theory of it being sort of a lighter fermented ripe tea. Yeah, so really tasty tea. In my experience too, it probably goes a few extra steeps beyond what you'd expect a normal ripe to do. So definitely going to be enjoying my last session of this. In terms of just how I grade it, well, okay, one last thing. Aftertaste is also very good. Something that I don't always note for ripe. It has uncommon depth and aftertaste. So being made from sort of like what we'd expect raw Pu'erh material to be made with, in a vendor that's not exactly like low, that sells raw Pu'erh that's a little bit more expensive too, like White2Tea. Trying to struggle how to phrase that. It's unsurprising that it would have some of these characteristics of quality that we'd expect from a raw pour. So yeah, to go back to that, I would rate this amongst the very best ripe pours that I've had. One of my favorites that I've had is that Anxiang Shu, the Dai Ripe, that Shah has sent me before. I really like the version that he has stored in Atlanta. Probably rate this really similarly, frankly. It's definitely one of the best ripes I've had in a couple of years, so probably going to give this a 8.2 rating. So really, really good rating. And that being said, this is one that, I'm probably not going to buy a cake of. If anything, if I order more tea from White2Tea, maybe I'll order another sample, maybe I won't. I'm very glad to have tried it. For me, knowing the tea and stuff, I know it'd have to, I'm happy to sample it, but it'd have to occupy a very similar drinking space with the raw that I drink on the regular basis, and which historically is just not proven to be true for many other teas. So it's just something that I'm happy to drink. Is way too expensive to drink on the daily. I asked my wife this morning if she could notice any difference between this tea and just sort of the normal ones we've been drinking, and she said, nope, it tastes like the same stuff. So for her, and it doesn't matter. So the point being, it's sort of a waste to drink it in that context. So it'd have to sort of just take the space of something like a raw pour for me, and that just has not historically happened. So sorry, I am babbling on a bunch. Long story short, this is a very good tea. You should buy a sample. You should try it out. If you like it, and if you think you are into sort of this more refined, elegant, high-end ripe experience, then totally pick up a cake. I think it's worthwhile. Okay, thank you for tuning in, and I will see y'all next time.